Stay in my bed tonight. In the Dust Creek storm, wind howled and bent the roof beams as Naomi Carter, black schoolteacher, clutching her rain-soaked lesson book, shivered before the wooden door of Isaiah Holt. The solitary man, blue eyes marked by the fire of his past, opened and draped a thick quilt across her shoulders. Inside, the hearth burned hot, a chess game left unfinished, and a steaming cup of tea thickened the air with a warmth that bordered on stifling. One night of shelter in a bachelor's cabin might grant her safety, yet could just as easily set her fragile reputation ablaze. When their eyes met, a silent flame leapt high. Was it the beginning of love or the snare of fate? In Dust Creek, on certain evenings when the sun sank behind the mountains and the light turned gray before the dark could fully fall, one often saw a lone figure walking the main street, Naomi Carter. Naomi was a black woman, 28 years old. Her frame was thin yet steady, like a reed that refused to bend in the wind. She always carried an old leather satchel, worn but dependable, filled with books, a slate, and a few small things for her class. For her, clothing only needed to be clean and modest enough to suit the schoolhouse. Yet her eyes, the one thing people remembered most, always carried a sorrow that had no name. It was not the loud sorrow of tears, but a quiet depth, so still and so deep that anyone who met it felt they had brushed against a secret that was not theirs to know. By day, Naomi was the devoted teacher at the little wooden schoolhouse on the edge of town. The square building, with its weathered boards and gray roof, stood plain against the prairie, yet each morning it filled with laughter and chatter. Children from 6 to 14 crowded in to learn their letters and numbers, and sometimes just to sit in a room with desks, a chalkboard, and a woman who always listened. "Good morning, Miss Carter," they shouted in a cheerful chorus, rushing inside with bright faces. And in those moments, Naomi's stern expression softened. A rare smile would break through, dimming the sadness in her eyes. For those hours, she was no longer the woman carrying emptiness inside, but a patient, steady teacher, respected and needed. That joy ended with the final ring of the bell. When the children scattered home, Naomi carefully stacked her books, brushed chalk dust from her skirt, and walked the quiet road back to her rented room. Dust Creek settled into evening silence. Hooves grew fewer on the street, shop doors closed, and cooking smoke rose from family hearths. Naomi returned instead to her small, narrow space, a bed, a low wooden table, and a single oil lamp burning late into the night. On that table lay a bundle of yellowed letters, the paper frayed, the ink blurred, yet the words could still be read. They were from Samuel, her fiancé, the soldier who had gone to war and never returned. She had read them so many times she knew every line by heart, but still she kept them like treasure. The last letters never reached her. Instead, one day a messenger brought a folded slip of paper, as cold as a blade. "Regret to inform you. Private Samuel Winters killed in action. July 2nd. Remains not recovered. Deepest sympathies." Naomi remembered that night with painful clarity. The lamp burned bright, but all she could see was darkness. From that moment on, she was no longer the young dreamer waiting on a porch in Pennsylvania. She became a woman who wrapped her shattered heart tight and carried it west, all the way to this hard land. People in Dust Creek knew her as a fine teacher, strict but fair, gentle yet unyielding. They did not know or did not ask that on long nights she sat alone, reading Samuel's last letter again and again, straining to hear the voice that would never return. Over time, the pain no longer brought tears. It became an empty space, a silence she learned to live with. That silence forced her to stand firm, to be the woman who could care for herself, for the school, and for the children who depended on her. Loss had made her strong, but it had also carved a hollow in her soul, one no one could ever truly fill. 3 miles west of Dust Creek, the land opened wide and flat, rolling out in grasses that stretched clear to the horizon. There, a lone wooden house stood firm against the emptiness, a marker of grit and endless labor. That house belonged to Isaiah Holt. Isaiah was 35, tall and broad-shouldered, with calloused hands earned from years of wringing work out of the prairie. He was no stranger to Dust Creek. Everyone in town knew his name. They respected his hard work, trusted his fairness when he lent a hand. But they also whispered that Isaiah Holt kept too much distance. He would fix a broken wagon wheel for a passerby, lead a stray cow back to its rightful owner, yet never linger by a fire longer than a polite word or two. Folks knew why. The fire from 15 years back was still spoken of. Isaiah, barely past 20, had lived then with his parents and younger sister in a small home. One night, the flames rose fierce, swallowing all before neighbors could arrive. Isaiah walked out alive, scarred on the skin, but worse in memory. From then on, he lived alone, raising a ranch out of nothing, as if laying board by board in place of the house he had lost, though he knew nothing could ever bring it back. Now and then, Dust Creek townsfolk spotted him at gatherings, a harvest fair, a church service. He kept to the back, nodded in greeting, listened in silence, and slipped away before the talking began. Children stared at him wide-eyed. Women cast quiet glances, yet none dared step closer. Too solitary a man, they thought, and left it at that. But even in that solitude, Isaiah's heart was not stone. Sometimes, passing the schoolhouse on the edge of town, he caught sight of Naomi Carter stepping to the doorway, her eyes soft as she watched her students spill out. He had once heard her laughter rise on the wind, seen her dark skirt brush dust from the road. Though their words had never stretched beyond polite greetings, he knew the stillness in her carried a sorrow that echoed his own. He never let himself dream, but her shadow lingered, making his empty house feel all the lonelier. Then came the night Dust Creek sky blackened, as if covered by a giant hand. Wind howled, red dust whipped the air. Lightning tore the heavens wide, showing rooftops quaking under the storm's rage. Rain fell like a river, hammering shingles, flooding streets. In that fury, the boarding house where Naomi lived gave way. The timbers split, water rushed in, drowning the fragile safety she had clung to. She stumbled out, soaked to the bone, clutching tight the only thing spared, the worn lesson book she carried each day. Everything else, clothes, papers, belongings, was lost beneath rain and wreckage. She heard the frail cry of old Mrs. Patterson, the landlady, calling from below. Naomi knew then she had no home left. Outside, wind lashed her face, rain plastered her dress to her skin, cold cutting deep. She stood at the crossroads, trembling. Where could she go? Every other inn was full. The church would not keep its doors open through the storm. To sleep outside meant risking her very life. Panic rose sharp in her chest. Then, through the torrent, she lifted her eyes. Out across the dark, a single light flickered steady. Far off in the field, a window glowed gold, stubborn against the storm. The light belonged to Isaiah Holt's ranch. Naomi pressed the lesson book hard against her chest. Her mother's voice and the whispers of townsfolk all returned at once. A black woman seeking shelter in a bachelor's home at midnight. By dawn, gossip would spread like fire. But with the storm shrieking, the cold biting, and no other refuge left, she had no choice. She pulled her soaked shawl tight, set her shoulders, and stepped into the rain. The wind tried to shove her back, but she pressed on. Each step was a choice, a quiet prayer that ahead lay safety. The house grew nearer, rising like a fortress against the night. Firelight glowed through the window, smoke curling from the chimney, a promise of warmth. Naomi climbed the porch, heart hammering. Her hand shook as she raised it, knocking 3 times on the heavy wooden door. In that moment, fate bent its course, for her and for Isaiah Holt. The knock came sharp, lost among the shriek of wind and the pounding rain on the roof. Isaiah Holt set his oil lamp on the table and moved to the door. He expected no visitor in a storm like this. But when his calloused hand drew back the bolt and the heavy wood swung open, the sight before him stopped him cold. Naomi Carter stood there, drenched to the bone. Her dress clung tight, her hands clutching a soaked lesson book, as if it were the only treasure left her. Her hair hung loose, plastered against her face where rain and tears blurred into one. Her dark eyes, wide with fear and despair, held deep within a fragile light of belief that if she knocked here, someone might open and grant her shelter. Isaiah asked no questions. He reached instead for the thick moss-green quilt hanging by the door and draped it across her trembling shoulders. The scent of wool and dry pine cut through the storm's dampness. His voice was low, steady. "Come inside, before the cold cuts you through." Hearing that voice, firm as a pillar, Naomi found the strength to keep her knees from giving way. She stepped over the threshold into a room lit by fire. The hearth crackled, shadows dancing across the wooden walls. Naomi sank into a chair near the blaze, still holding her book close. Isaiah poured her a cup of hot tea, steam curling into her blurred vision. She took it, her frozen hands shaking, but the warmth seeped into her fingers, pulling her back to the present. The house surprised her. From outside, it had seemed nothing more than the rough shelter of a solitary rancher. Inside, it told another story. Shelves lined with worn books stood neat against the wall. A hand-carved chessboard rested on a small table, its honey-colored pieces set in perfect order. Her voice rasped, thin and hoarse. I'm sorry to trouble you." The boarding house collapsed. I've nowhere else." Isaiah did not answer at once. He laid another log in the fire, the flames flaring warm across the room. When he turned, his blue eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "You're safe here. Don't be afraid." Naomi lowered her gaze, tightening her grip on the cup. She was long used to glances that weighed and measured, to whispers about her skin and her place. But Isaiah's eyes carried none of that. They held only the look of one human being seeing another in need. The room fell quiet save for the storm's roar outside, as if the world itself strained to tear everything apart. Naomi sipped the tea. Its faint bitterness softened into a trace of sweetness, and within her chest a slow renewal stirred. Outside the tempest raged. Rain hammered the roof, wind shrieked like a wild thing. But inside there was firelight, a hot cup of tea, a quilt to ward off the cold, and the silent, steady presence of Isaiah Holt. Naomi closed her eyes, letting the warmth drive out the chill. Rising within her was a feeling strange yet familiar, being sheltered, and perhaps, for the first time in years, she felt she was not wholly alone. Naomi stepped out from the small guest room Isaiah had set aside, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the sleeves that hung too long. She wore an old set of his father's clothes, a thick work shirt and loose trousers held by suspenders, draped awkwardly over her slender frame. She looked like a child dressed in garments too large, at once misplaced and strangely innocent. Yet in that awkwardness, she felt an unexpected peace. The fire still burned, its red light washing warmth over the wooden walls. Isaiah had set a kettle of tea on the iron grate, the faint scent of herbs cutting through the damp smell left by the storm. He sat there, his broad figure folded into a wooden chair, eyes fixed on the flames as though speaking to memories only he could hear. Naomi settled opposite him, hiding her unease by clutching the steaming cup he had poured. The wind shrieked against the door, the roof trembled beneath the storm's force, yet inside this small room all she felt was safety. For a long while they said nothing. Only the fire crackled, steady as a heartbeat in a house accustomed to silence. Naomi let out a slow breath, her gaze sliding to the man across from her, broad shoulders, large hands resting on his knees, eyes the color of storm-dark sky reflecting the firelight. He looked like a stone carved by years of weather, unyielding. And it was that very steadiness that calmed her, though they had shared only a handful of moments. At last, Naomi spoke, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Holt, I only ask to stay a few days, until I can find another place." Her words trailed off, hanging fragile in the air. She lowered her eyes, hands tightening on the cup, afraid she had asked too much. Isaiah lifted his gaze. His eyes, usually distant and cold, now held something both steady and kind. He let the silence stretch a moment longer before speaking slowly. "This house is too big for one." Naomi looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. He paused, as if weighing what came next, then added, "Stay, not for convenience, because you deserve to be safe." The words were plain, stripped of flourish, yet they struck her like a stone breaking ice. For years she had known only pitying tones, suspicious glances, or cold silence. No one had spoken to her with that mix of firmness and gentle offering. Heat stung at the corners of her eyes. She gave a small nod, unwilling to trust her voice. Inside her chest, the heart she had kept shut tight for so long cracked open, letting in a sliver of warmth. Outside, the storm raged on, rain battering the roof, wind howling like the end of all things. But inside, two guarded souls now sat across from each other, their shared presence forming its own reply. Isaiah rose, crossed to the shelf, and brought down a small wooden box. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside lay a handful of candles and a half-carved chess piece. He turned it in his hand, the fire catching on its unfinished lines. "When the nights grow too long, I sit and carve these," he said, voice rough but soft. "Keeps my hands busy, keeps the heart from dwelling on what's gone." Naomi studied the piece, the shape of a horse already emerging in the wood. She had no words, only a tightening in her chest. In that quiet moment she understood. His solitude ran as deep as her own. They sat in silence again, letting the fire and storm beyond serve as backdrop to a slow-growing closeness. Naomi set her cup down, folded her hands in her lap, and whispered almost shyly, "Thank you for opening the door. I wouldn't have known where else to go." Isaiah regarded her for a long moment, then gave a single nod, an answer as brief as it was complete. Words were never his way, and she needed none. It was enough to know that here she would not face the storm alone. That night, they shared silence. No probing questions, no promises, only a simple invitation to stay. Yet it was enough to open the first door of both their hearts. The morning after the storm, Dust Creek's sky was impossibly blue, as though the night's fury had never touched it. But what the storm left behind was more than broken shingles, fallen trees, and mud streaking the main road. It left behind something swifter than wind, a rumor. On the boardwalk by the general store, ranch wives clustered in tight knots, brushing dust from their skirts and lowering their voices. At the saloon, men straightened chairs and patched the awning, all while leaning close to trade words. In Dust Creek, truth never needed proof. Once spoken, a tale became fact. By sunrise, the town believed one thing. The black schoolteacher, Naomi Carter, had spent the night in Isaiah Holt's house. "Lord have mercy this town," sighed Mrs. Henderson, famed for her sharp tongue, half in pity, half in delight. "That poor proper girl, and still she—" She let the words hang, leaving listeners to finish the thought in their own minds. Naomi walked the main street, eyes forward, back straight, yet the whispers clung to her ears. Her dress was as neat as always, her manner as proper as any school morning, but each step seemed weighted. The children ran up, calling out, "Good morning, Miss Carter," as though nothing had changed. The adults, however, stole glances, some turning away, others shaking their heads with meaning unspoken. The schoolhouse waited at the end of the road, steady as ever. Yet Naomi knew its peace was fragile as a candle's flame. Her work, the one anchor of her life, now stood on unsteady ground. That afternoon, as she gathered books, a knock came at the door. It was not the quick patter of children returning for forgotten papers, but a deliberate rhythm, slow and commanding. Naomi looked up. In the doorway loomed a man. Jeremiah Blackwell. No one in Dust Creek mistook his face. Past 40, dressed in a sharp vest and polished leather shoes, he wore a smile always polite yet cold as steel. He was the wealthiest landholder for miles, owner of ranches, mines, and shops. In this town, every brick seemed to cast his shadow. "Miss Carter." He tipped his hat, voice smooth, rehearsed. "I hope I'm not intruding." Naomi gripped the book in her hands, steadying her breath. "Mr. Blackwell, what brings you here?" He stepped inside, his eyes sliding over the small desks, the chalkboard scrawled with sums, then back to her with a smile that held no warmth. "I hear you've had trouble." He let the words dangle, baited. "This town, you know, is small, but rumors move fast. One night at Holt's place and your reputation wavers." Naomi stood tall, her voice firm though her heart raced. "I did nothing wrong. I sought shelter from the storm. People may say otherwise, but the truth remains." Blackwell's smile sharpened like a blade drawn fresh. "Truth, Miss Carter, matters less than what people believe. And right now, belief is against you. You risk your position, your standing, everything you've built here." Her chest tightened. He spoke no lies. In a place where whispers carried more weight than records, a black schoolteacher had little shield against rumor. He stepped closer, lowering his tone as if offering a secret. "But there is a way." Naomi's dark eyes flashed wary. "What way?" Blackwell set his hat upon the teacher's desk, leaned forward, both hands pressing the wood. "Marry me." The air froze. Naomi blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon. What did you say?" "Marry me," he repeated, voice flat with certainty. "My name, my standing, will protect you. The gossip will vanish, your position will remain secure, and you will live in comfort, in respect, a fine home, fine clothes, the town's esteem." Naomi stepped back, each of his words pushing her further. "And in return?" His smile widened, eyes like ice, leaving no disguise. "In return, I gain a wife befitting my station, a teacher, respected, intelligent, virtuous, perfect for the image I need when the railroad comes through Dust Creek. You'll help me ensure my power rests not only on wealth, but on propriety." Every word struck like a cold storm wind. Naomi's pulse quickened, as though dragged into another tempest, this one of calculation and control. "You would make me a commodity," she said, her voice breaking. Blackwell straightened, took up his hat, and smiled again. "I would give you an escape, Naomi. In this town you have few choices. With me, you would no longer be a schoolteacher in a shabby room. You would be Mrs. Blackwell." The door swung open with a gust, dust swirling in with the murmur of voices from the street. Naomi saw figures pass, their steps slowing, ears angled toward her window. The morning's fire of rumor had caught, and Blackwell knew how to fan it higher. Naomi stood rigid, her chest burning with anger and helplessness. Before her, Jeremiah Blackwell was no longer just a man of wealth and status. He was the shadow prepared to smother her life with cold, merciless design. When Jeremiah Blackwell left the wooden schoolhouse, Naomi stood frozen by the teacher's desk. The door closed behind him, leaving only the faint smell of lamp oil and the heavy shadow of a darkened future. Chalk marks lingered on the board, but all she could see was the threat before her. Loss of work, loss of shelter, loss of the fragile respect she had guarded so carefully. She stepped outside slowly, clutching her lesson book to her chest. The prairie still heaved with wind and damp earth after the storm, dust and moisture stinging her face. Her steps carried her to the only place left to her now, Isaiah Holt's ranch. Inside, the fire still burned steady, but Naomi's heart was restless. Blackwell's words echoed like a verdict she could not appeal. She sank into the chair near the hearth, feeling the blaze's warmth, yet unable to still her trembling. The door opened. Isaiah entered, dust on his shoulders, care etched deep on his face. He set his hat down and fixed his gaze on her, blue eyes burning with something fierce. "I heard," he said, his voice low and iron-strong. Naomi pressed her lips tight, clutching her skirt. "This town doesn't need much to turn against me. One storm, one night, and he turned it into a weapon." Isaiah stepped closer, the weight of each stride settling on the wooden floor. He stopped before her, his rough hands trembling once, then clenching firm. The storm outside faded. All that remained was his steady gaze cutting through her fear. "Marry me, Naomi." The words fell sharp, like a spade striking dry ground, splitting it open to let light in. Naomi looked up, eyes wide, heart racing. She had no time to think, no shield prepared. Isaiah went on, voice raw but resolute. "I have nothing but this land and this heart, but I'd lose both before I let him take you." The fire flared as though in agreement. Naomi trembled, tears spilling as she covered her mouth to stifle a sob. She was used to carrying her burdens alone, used to loss pressed down in silence. But here stood a man willing to stake his life to guard her. "Isaiah," she whispered, breaking. "They'll laugh. They'll say you married me only to kill a rumor. You'll take their scorn on yourself." He shook his head, eyes blazing. "What's my honor worth if I stand by while he makes you a prize to be bartered?" Naomi turned, tears streaking her cheeks. In her mind, the memory of her fallen fiancé blurred with the man before her. Both had sworn to protect her, but this promise came from flesh and blood, willing to stand against the town for her sake. She drew in a breath, gathering courage. "Are you certain this isn't only defiance against Blackwell?" Isaiah laid one broad hand flat on the table between them. His voice slowed, each word deliberate. "I knew from the moment you stepped into my house in the storm, my life was no longer empty. You brought light into a place that knew only wind and silence. Won't let anyone steal it away." Naomi's tears welled again, but now she saw in his gaze not pity, faith. "Isaiah," she breathed, and without meaning to, she stepped closer. He held out his hand, not touching, only waiting. "Naomi Carter, I can't promise wealth, but I can promise a home. Not just of wood and stone, but of love. A home where you'll never face the storm alone again." Her hand trembled as she set it into his. His calloused palm closed gently, as though holding the most fragile thing he'd ever known. Isaiah tightened his grip, eyes aflame yet tempered with care. He bent slightly, his voice hushed. "May I kiss you, Naomi?" Her breath shuddered, but she nodded. Their lips met softly at first, testing, almost unbelieving. Then breath melted into breath, the years of loneliness breaking into yearning. His arms wrapped her close, yet every touch held restraint. His hand paused at her shoulder, his whisper rough. "Are you comfortable?" Her face pressed against his chest. She felt the thunder of his heart. "Yes. Don't stop." The fire cracked, casting golden light over two souls trembling not from cold, but from release. Isaiah's rough fingers traced her tear-stained cheek. Again he asked, like a prayer, "May I?" Naomi clung to him, voice breaking. "Let me feel alive again. Please." And that night, they gave all they had, not in haste, not in possession, but in gentleness. Two scarred hearts found warmth in each other, each kiss and whispered question, each nod and quiet answer, filling the emptiness left by years of solitude. Later, Naomi lay in his arms, her hair spilled across his chest. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Isaiah pressed a kiss to her brow, murmuring, "Thank you for letting me love you." Outside, the wind still howled, but within the wooden walls, two hearts had found their home. Jeremiah Blackwell had never been a man to accept defeat. A refusal, a defiant glance. These were never endings for him, only signals to strike his next blow. And Dust Creek, a small town surviving on land, crops, and cattle, was fertile ground for the game of power he had long prepared. The rumor about Naomi Carter still lingered, but within days a new fear crept under every roof. Red-stamped debt notices, carried by Blackwell's men, began to appear. The Brennan family was first. 3 years passed. They had borrowed to buy corn seed. Now, without warning, the debt was called due. "But there's still a year left," Tom Brennan shouted, his rough hands shaking as he held the paper. The messenger only shrugged, curt. Blackwell says pay or lose the land. Before the Brennans could catch their breath, the same fate reached the Petersons, then the Wellers. It became clear. Blackwell had quietly bought up notes from the local bank. Debts once manageable now became shackles tightening around the town's neck. Within days, Dust Creek quaked. Conversations at the saloon turned grim. Suppers grew silent, broken only by the clink of spoons on clay bowls. Families counted coins by lamplight, casting furtive looks toward the fields their fathers had broken from wilderness, now at risk of passing into another man's hands. Naomi heard first from her students. Pa says we might sell the cows to pay. Ma cried last night, afraid we'll lose our home. Each innocent voice drove like a knife into her chest. That afternoon, when the children had gone, Naomi sat alone in the schoolhouse. The door stood ajar, the wind pushing in red dust and the hollow echoes of a shaken town. She laid her hand on her lesson book, creased and water-stained from the storm, and felt the weight of futility pressing down. She had believed knowledge could lift these small souls, that if she sowed decency, the town would change. Now all of it seemed fragile before a single word. Debt. That evening, Isaiah came. His frame filled the doorway, his weathered face drawn with deeper lines than usual. I just came from the Millers, he said. They got papers, too. Everyone has. Naomi lifted her gaze, heavy with dread. What does he want? The land? The whole town? Isaiah's voice was rough. He's buying up debts to choke the people. If they can't pay, their land goes to him. Then Dust Creek belongs to Jeremiah Blackwell. Naomi rose, stepping to the window. Outside, night pressed thick, a few dim lanterns flickering weak against the dark. They whispered about me once. I thought if I endured, the storm would pass. But this is not mine alone. This is a whole town being strangled. Isaiah was silent. His hands clenched, then opened, restless for something to grasp. At last he said, Some are talking of leaving, packing up families, heading elsewhere to start again. Naomi spun, eyes wide. Leaving? And the school? The children? Humph nodded slowly. I know. But when the yoke tightens, sometimes leaving is the only way out. Maybe the only way to escape Blackwell. Her chest grew heavy, crushed beneath the thought. Faces rose in her mind. Jimmy Brennan's freckled grin, Clara Weller's careful fingers smoothing the edges of worn notebooks. If they lost their school, their community, would learning still have a place here? No, she whispered, her voice trembling yet resolute. We cannot leave. If we go, we hand him victory. We admit that justice and kindness mean nothing against his gold. Isaiah came close, his warm hand settling firm on her shoulder. I want to fight him too. But Naomi, you must see. Blackwell has money, and the law besides. Judges, gavels, the whole machine. Standing against him means standing against all of it. She met his gaze and saw both fire and helplessness in those storm-blue eyes. So what? We bow our heads, let him take the town's future. A gust slammed the door, red dust sweeping in, the oil lamp flickering nearly out. For a moment, Naomi saw it plain. The town's hope, already fragile, now swept thin by this storm of debt. The faces once lifted to her with trust, now clouded with fear. She turned back to her desk, opened her book, And on its last page, beneath her pupil's crooked scrawls, wrote a single line with a hand that trembled but would not stop. Some storms come not from the sky, but from the hearts of men. Isaiah read the words, nodded slow. And to weather it, we'll need another storm. A storm of courage. Naomi closed the book, clutching it to her chest. Her heart was heavy, but inside a flame had been struck. She knew this was only the beginning of a battle Blackwell had long prepared. And Dust Creek, small and weary, would have to rise against the debt trap tightening around every soul. In the days after the debt storm, Dust Creek lay under a gloom deeper than any weather. On the main street, neighbors passed without a word, afraid their eyes might betray the despair gnawing inside. Families clutched debt papers stamped in red, holding them as if they were death warrants hanging over their lives. Naomi Carter walked through town and felt every weighted glance. Once, the gossip about her night at Isaiah Holt's ranch had been enough to shame her. Now she was little more than a shadow swept into Jeremiah Blackwell's schemes. Folks no longer wasted breath whispering about her. They were too busy trying to hold on to their homes. That evening, Isaiah vanished. Without explanation, he left the ranch, and Naomi sat alone by the fire, worry pressing hard. Outside, the sky was gray, the wind rolling red dust into circles, as if the land itself braced for upheaval. Her thoughts circled endlessly. Where had he gone? Was he planning to flee like others whispered of? Or had he thrown himself into danger? She kept vigil all night, the oil lamp burning low, its weak glow trembling over her face. Each gust rattling the roof made her heart seize, her mind full of images of Blackwell's hand tightening around Dust Creek. At dawn, when the prairie glowed blood-red, hoofbeats thundered at the porch. Naomi rushed to the door. Isaiah stood there, face dark with exhaustion, clothes streaked with dust, his storm-blue eyes burning with resolve. In his hands was a thick leather bundle tied tight as if guarding treasure. "Where were you all night?" Naomi's voice shook, half anger, half fear. Isaiah stepped inside, laying the bundle on the table. "I had to be sure. I had to take something with my own hands, something that can end Blackwell's hold." Naomi stared at the bundle. "What is it?" He untied the cord and spread papers, seals, and letters across the table. Proof. Documents he forged to seize land. Letters between him and officials. Bribes to twist laws and maps. This is the throne he built out of debt. And now, it will tear him down. Naomi's breath caught. She touched the papers, her fingers brushing crooked handwriting, judges' signatures, bank stamps. Each mark cut sharp into the false face Blackwell had worn for years. "How did you get these?" she whispered, eyes fixed on the damning pile. Isaiah was silent a moment, then sat opposite her. In the pale morning light, his face showed the deep lines of memory. "There's something you don't know. Before I was a rancher, I was a soldier." Naomi's eyes widened. "After the fire that took my family, I had nothing left to hold me. I chose the battlefield to pour my pain into. Those years taught me to read maps, to pick locks, to find a weak spot in defenses. Skills I thought I'd buried. But last night, I used them again." She fell still, picturing Isaiah slipping through darkness, past guards, breaking into Blackwell's office to seize the secrets. The wealthiest man in the county hid behind iron and locks. "You risked too much," she whispered, her chest tight. "If he had found you, then I wouldn't be here now." Isaiah cut in, voice steady. I knew the risk. But Naomi, without proof, we are blind men striking at a giant. He has the law in his pocket. All we have is truth, and truth is the only weapon strong enough to bring him down. Naomi studied him, then touched the papers again. Her hands trembled, not only with fear, but with something new, hope, fragile but real. You did this for me? Her voice broke. Isaiah shook his head, his gaze softening. I did it for Dust Creek, but also for you, because I won't stand by while you carry this weight alone. In that moment, Naomi saw his past, the soldier's years, the scars of blood and fire, not just as wounds, but as the forge that had shaped him into the man willing to defend her and the town. The small room was hushed, the sound of papers rustling under the draft the only noise. Naomi pressed the bundle to her chest, holding it like a fragile faith. Then we will not bow, she said, her voice steadier. He has money and power, but we have truth, and truth will be spoken. Isaiah nodded, a rare smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. Yes, but it must strike at the right moment. The blow must fall when he feels most secure. Only then will Dust Creek see Jeremiah Blackwell for what he is. Outside, the wind lifted red dust high into the morning sky. But inside the wooden walls, Naomi felt something more than fear, an ember burning. The past had become a weapon, and in Isaiah Holt's hands, that weapon might yet save a town. That night, wind swept in from the prairie, carrying the damp scent of rain-soaked earth. The wooden schoolhouse on Dust Creek's edge, where by day children recited letters and laughter rang out, now brimmed with shadowed faces. People arrived in silence, boots heavy on the gravel, oil lamp light spilling from narrow windows like a candle fighting storm dark. Inside, desks had been pushed aside to make room for benches dragged in from home. Neighbors sat shoulder to shoulder, hats clenched, hands clasped tight around a wife's fingers, children burying their faces in their mother's shawls. Murmurs rustled through the crowd, none daring to rise above a whisper. Naomi Carter stood at the corner, her lesson book clutched like a talisman. In the dim glow, her face was calm, though her heart thundered. She knew this was no ordinary meeting. This was the hour Dust Creek's fate would be decided. The door swung wide. Jeremiah Blackwell entered, dressed in a tailored black suit that marked him as master of the room. He was not alone. Two armed men shadowed him, rifles slung loose but enough to stir dread. Behind him, a clerk carried a thick ledger, the debts he meant to tighten like a noose. "Thank you for coming," Blackwell said, his voice smooth, cold as iron. "This town rests on law and order. Those who borrow must repay. Those who resist must face consequence. I am not a villain. I am the keeper of fairness." A gaunt old farmer rose, voice trembling. "But sir, these loans still had time. Why demand payment now?" Blackwell's brow lifted, lips curling. "The law grants me the right to call them due if cause exists. And I have cause. Some of you plan to flee Dust Creek, to cheat your debts. Is that not fraud?" The room fell heavier still. Men lowered their eyes. No one spoke. Naomi's throat went dry. She looked at the parents who had trusted her with their children, at the little ones now pressed close in fear. They were all pawns in Blackwell's game. Across the room, Isaiah Holt leaned against the wall, blue eyes lit sharp in lamplight. He watched Blackwell like a wolf measuring his prey, waiting for the moment to strike. At Blackwell's signal, the clerk spread debt notices across the teacher's desk, the same desk where Naomi had taught the alphabet. The cruel contrast made her chest ache. "Here," Blackwell said smoothly, "lies proof of what you owe. Not one among you can deny it, and the law stands with me." Silence pressed tight. Only the clerk's pen scratched out his record. Naomi's grip on her book tightened. She remembered Isaiah's words. Strike at the right moment. Strike hardest where he feels untouchable. She glanced his way. Isaiah gave a slight nod, eyes steady. Blackwell began reading names like a judge passing sentence. Brennan, Miller, Peterson, all in debt. Failed to pay within 3 days, and the land is mine. A sob broke from the back. Mary Brennan clutching her boy, eyes red with fear. Isaiah's fist tightened, but he stood firm, waiting. At last, Blackwell turned toward Naomi, his smile sharp and false. "And you, Miss Carter, a teacher, though your reputation is already stained. I offered you a chance to save yourself and this school. You refused, and now you have brought this fate upon us all." Eyes turned to Naomi. Her heart clenched, but a surge of strength rose. She stepped forward, her voice clear. "Mr. Blackwell, law does not belong to the man who buys judges, and Dust Creek does not belong to you." A ripple spread through the room. Blackwell blinked, then laughed. "Big words. What proof do you have?" Isaiah moved from the shadows, leather bundle in hand. He laid it beside the debt papers and opened it. Seals, signatures, letters caught the lamplight. "Here," he said, voice deep and ringing, "are proofs of his bribes, forgeries, and lies. The people of Dust Creek have the right to know." The room burst into sound. Papers passed from hand to hand. Eyes widened, tears welled, anger and relief mingling. Blackwell's face blanched. "Forgeries!" he roared. "Lies spun by a bitter loner." But Sheriff Peterson, silent until now, stepped forward. He lifted a letter, scanned it, then raised his head, face dark. "This signature, I know it. Judge Harrison's. And if this is real—" His words trailed off, but their weight thundered. The villagers understood. Blackwell was no untouchable lord. He was a fraud. The air shifted like fire catching dry grass. Men rose to their feet. Some moved to block the door. Women hugged their children tighter, but their eyes gleamed with hope. Naomi drew a deep breath, standing beside Isaiah. She knew the fight was far from over, but tonight, in the wooden schoolhouse, truth had broken through, and for the first time, Jeremiah Blackwell's shadow began to tremble. When Isaiah laid the bundle on the teacher's desk, the air in the schoolhouse froze. The oil lamp flickered, throwing long shadows over papers thick with stamps and signatures. Faces that had been bowed in fear lifted all at once. No longer did they look at Blackwell with the usual dread, but with doubt, with expectation. Isaiah drew out the first letter, his voice deep and steady. "This bears Judge Harrison's hand and seal, proof of Jeremiah Blackwell's bribe. This is not rumor. This is his mark." He passed it to Sheriff Peterson. The old man, long bowed to avoid crossing the powerful, fumbled for his spectacles, studied the inked lines, then gave a slow nod. His words were quiet, yet they rolled like thunder through the crowded room. "The signature, it's genuine. These papers are no forgery." A wave broke loose, murmurs swelling into cries. A mother clutching her child wept aloud. A farmer who had sat mute now raised his hat high, whispering thanks to God. Blackwell paled but found his tongue, his voice sharp. "Lies! A desperate soldier's trick. Do you think scraps of paper can topple law and power? Isaiah answered only by laying down more evidence. Maps of school land with forged seals, receipts of money flowing from Blackwell's hand to officials in the capital. Each sheet struck like a hammer against the coffin of Blackwell's reign. The villagers pressed forward, eyes blazing with fury and awe. A young man, Brennan's eldest, leapt up, pointing straight at Blackwell. "You robbed my father with these lies. You cheated this whole tone." Shouts rose in unison. Anger spread like fire on dry grass. Blackwell stumbled back, his composure cracking. "Fools! The law is still mine," he roared, then shoved the desk, scattering papers, and lunged for the door. But the farmers blocked his path. Tom Brennan and others stood like a wall. Blackwell's shove met solid shoulders that did not yield. Cornered, sweat breaking, he thrashed, his polished mask stripped bare to pitiful desperation. Sheriff Peterson stepped forward, drawing the old pistol at his hip. His voice rang, firm at last. "Jeremiah Blackwell, you are under arrest for bribery, forgery, and extortion." Blackwell tried to sneer, words twisting. "You think a pack of dirt farmers can bind me? I have money, allies in the capital." The sentence snapped off as the sheriff clamped iron cuffs on his wrist. The click of steel echoed like a verdict. Silence held for a heartbeat, then erupted into cheers. Men rose, fists in the air. Women wept and clung to their children, eyes shining. Even the little ones laughed, though they scarcely grasped the weight of what they had seen. Justice made flesh before them. Naomi stood still, tears spilling. She looked at Isaiah, broad, steady, his figure like a pillar holding up the very roof of hope. Years of solitude and fear seemed washed clean in that moment. Peterson motioned to Blackwell's guards, but their loyalty was gone. One muttered, "We don't follow you anymore." They seized him themselves, dragging him out through the jeers of the crowd. The oil lamp wavered with the commotion, then steadied. When the door slammed shut behind Blackwell, a new silence filled the room. Not the silence of fear, but of release. Naomi stepped forward, her voice trembling at first, then clear. Dust Creek need no longer bow to shadows. This school, it belongs not to Blackwell, but to our children, to knowledge, to the future. Hands calloused from years of toil clapped until the rafters shook, joined by cries that rang out with new fire. Isaiah came to her side, setting his rough hand on her shoulder. He said nothing, yet in his eyes she saw it plain. The fight was not over, but a door had opened. That night, Dust Creek did not sleep. Villagers gathered around fires, retelling how Blackwell had been shackled. Children mimicked the scene in play, chasing each other with gleeful shouts. Old men puffed pipes and swore they had never seen such a day. Later, at Holt's ranch, Naomi sat by the hearth, listening to the crackle of wood. Her heart stirred with something long absent. "For the first time," she whispered, "I feel I belong here." Isaiah turned, eyes soft yet steadfast. "Dust Creek needs you, Naomi, not only as its teacher, but as its faith. And I need you too." She did not answer, only smiled through tears. Outside, the storm of power had passed. Inside the wooden house the fire burned bright, lighting two souls who had found strength in each other. The night of the schoolhouse gathering ended with truth unveiled. From then on, Dust Creek would never bow to darkness again. The morning after, Dust Creek seemed dressed in a new skin. The sky stretched clear after the storm, clouds drifting easy as though the night's heaviness had been washed away. Along the red dust road, hooves clattered in rhythm with the murmurs of the morning market. But today, the greetings carried brighter eyes and lighter voices. The wooden schoolhouse at the town's edge, where fear had crowded only last night, rang now with children's laughter. Small shoes thudded across the yard, kicking up dust as voices rose in chorus. "Miss Carter! Miss Carter!" Naomi stepped onto the porch, hand pressed against her chest to steady her racing heart. The morning sun lit her face, turning her simple blue dress into a banner of quiet grace. Yet something in her eyes was new, not the mute sorrow of the past, but a living faith. Jimmy Brennan ran ahead, brown hair tousled, eyes alight. "You're not just our teacher," he declared with the certainty of youth. "You're our hope." Naomi faltered, tears welling. Years of wary glances and silent endurance, and now a child's words undid her. She knelt, resting a hand on his shoulder, voice soft. "No, Jimmy. You children are the hope of this town." Laughter rippled outward, more children swarming her like sparrows to their nest. Warmth filled her chest, as though the empty places in her heart were being mended, one bright voice at a time. From the fence line, Isaiah Holt watched beneath the brim of his hat, a smile tugging at his mouth. Pride swelled in him, not for last night's courage, but for the light shining now on Naomi's face. Villagers began arriving at the school. They came with baskets of vegetables, loaves of bread, eggs and chickens, leaving them quietly on the table at the door. Some bowed their heads as they passed her, honoring not only the woman, but the courage she had stood for. "Thank you, Miss Carter," whispered Mary Brennan, her voice breaking. "Without you and Isaiah, we'd be lost." Naomi smiled, though her chest tightened. She knew she had not done this alone. She was one link in a chain pulled taut by love and bravery. By midday, the church bell tolled across the prairie, not heavy, but triumphant, its echo rolling like a declaration. Dust Creek had outlasted the shadow. In the square, neighbors clasped hands, embraced long and fierce, no longer bound by fear. Naomi walked among them, hearing thanks and blessings, yet her mind fixed on Isaiah. She remembered him standing firm in the schoolhouse, laying the evidence bare, his eyes unflinching. Without him, could she have stepped forward? Could the town have broken free? By evening, the children gone home, Naomi lingered alone in the classroom. Sunset gilded the chalkboard, the worn notebooks, the crooked handwriting of her pupils. She sighed, but it was not sorrow. It was fullness. The door creaked. Isaiah entered, bringing the scent of sweat and prairie wind. He set his hat on the desk and asked, quietly, "Tired?" Naomi shook her head, smiling gently. "No. Only, today feels like a dream. I'm afraid I'll wake and find it gone." Isaiah sat on a bench, studying her as if to set her image in stone. "This is no dream, Naomi. You saved Dust Creek, and you saved me too." Her heart beat wild. Words failed her. The last light poured through, painting his weathered face with a truth she could not deny. She turned to the window, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you believe two lonely souls can truly make a home?" Isaiah's eyes caught the fading sun. "I do. And I think we've just begun." His words settled deep, a promise plain and enduring. That night, Dust Creek lay quiet for the first time in months. Firelight glowed in every home, not just for warmth, but as proof that darkness had been driven out. At Holt's Ranch, Naomi lingered on the porch, listening to the hum of crickets beneath a sky strewn with stars. For the first time, she did not feel outside Joy's circle. She was part of Dust Creek, and Dust Creek was part of her. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but a new dawn had risen, and in Naomi Carter's heart, hope had taken root at last. That afternoon, when the school bell rang for the last time, Naomi lingered at the lectern, fingertips brushing her pupils' notebooks left behind. Crooked, tender handwriting whispered of a tomorrow yet to come. Through the window, the prairie lay bathed in golden light, shadows stretching long across the brittle grass, as though Dust Creek itself had been laid beneath a soft, glowing quilt. The door opened. Isaiah filled the frame, tall against the sunset, his eyes carrying a gentleness at odds with his frame. He spoke few words, only stepped forward and extended his roughened hand, steady as the man himself. "Let's go home, Naomi." The invitation was simple, but within it lay every storm, every rumor, every hard-won shard of trust. Naomi gazed at that hand, memory pressing close, the long nights in a cold, rented room, the dim flame of a lonely lamp, the yellowed letters from Gettysburg, the emptiness that had once consumed her. Yet this time, she did not hesitate. Her hand met his, small and soft, but clasped firm in his calloused palm, a pledge, a promise. They left the schoolhouse, children's laughter still echoing faint on the yard. The path toward Holt's Ranch blazed with the red of sunset, the air scented with hay and wildflowers, a hymn bidding farewell to the old and greeting the new. The wooden house rose at the trail's end. Smoke curled from the chimney into the purpled sky. When Naomi stepped across the threshold, she knew, for the first time in years, she was not entering a shelter of necessity, but a home. The room was familiar, yet now transformed. The bright quilt hung over the chair, the hand-carved chessboard, the shelf of well-thumbed books, all came alive, no longer relics of a solitary man, but pieces of a life now opening to hers. Isaiah fed the fire, its glow casting his weathered face in shifting light. Naomi sat at the small table, fingers resting on the porcelain cup he had set for her. They spoke little, listening instead to the pop of kindling, the sigh of wind against the door, the pounding of their own hearts. "This house," Naomi whispered, voice catching. "Once it was only refuge in a storm. Now it's where I wish to stay." Isaiah looked up, his eyes burning in the firelight. He answered not with words, but with his hand, warm on her shoulder. In that touch she felt certainty, not promises spun of air, but the truth that she would no longer stand alone. Night deepened. Dogs barked in the distance. Horses stirred in their stalls. The ordinary sounds of life returned to a town too long muted. Inside, Naomi and Isaiah sat with the relics of their past, the yellowed letters she had carried for years, the wooden box of unsent notes he had carved. She set her bundle aside, saying softly, "We've held on too long to what cannot return. It's time to let the past rest." Isaiah nodded, closing the box with finality. "Yes, because now we have the present and a future to build." They sat long in silence, no longer the silence of loneliness, but of peace. The fire lit their faces, hearts once broken now finding rhythm together. Outside, the prairie wind carried a chill. Inside, fire and the meeting of their eyes gave warmth deeper still. The warmth of love, steady as a house that had weathered every storm. When Naomi laid her head on Isaiah's shoulder, she closed her eyes, and fear dissolved. The whispers, the shadows, the years of emptiness all vanished. She knew she had found home. Two souls once bound by loss had become each other's shelter. In a town once shadowed by greed and fear, they had proven something simple yet unyielding. Love and justice endure. And in that house of fire and love, Dust Creek began anew. As the town settled into quiet after its long storms, Naomi and Isaiah had kept more than land, more than a school, more than a house. They had kept each other. Their happiness did not rest on wealth, but on presence, on love unspoken yet steady. The sight of Naomi stepping into the cabin, the hearth burning bright, Isaiah's hand outstretched in welcome, was proof enough that sometimes happiness lies not in grand victories, but in being chosen each day by someone who means it. Dear friends, though this tale closes here, its echo lingers. Love, justice, and kindness can triumph even in towns steeped in shadow. If this story has touched you, please leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or lived a love that came late but proved deep and true? We would be honored to hear from you. May your evening be gentle, with warm lamplight and good memories close at hand.
cuenta que es gasolero y bueno,